Hey guys, Mr. Weaver here coming at you for Distance Learning Biology session number 3. Today's date is Wednesday, April 15th, 2020, and the weekly agenda that we have for today is to cover the second line of defense for your body's immune system, how it fights off different bad guy germ pathogens, and you got a worksheet called the first and second line of defense that I will post on Google Classroom as well as weaverscience.com. So that's kind of the basics of the week. If you would like to do the worksheet on Google Classroom and just resubmit it, that would be just as easy for me. But if you don't want to go that route, then let me show you what else you have in store or how else you could access the information for this week. So let me fire it up right next to my laptop as we're working in the home studio today. So if you go over to the biology link of weaverscience.com, go down to immunology. The very last 3 sessions that you're going to see is YouTube session number 3, which is the session today of April 15th, 2020. Session number 3 instructions, just in case you might have missed some of the instructions in this YouTube video. And then down there, last but not least, first and second line of defense worksheet, which will be shared as a copy of that in Google Docs. So that is kind of the name of the game. And as I mentioned, today's topic, we are going over the body's second line of defense. Now, before we get started, I can't stress enough, please take some time. Just copy these notes down, because as you actually write this material down, your brain is processing the material and you are 10 times more apt to remember this stuff when we do take a test at the end of the unit. So, what I want to start off with is just doing a quick little review session. And the last time I saw you guys indirectly was when we covered what the immune system was. It was the body's main line of fighting off disease and keeps invading pathogens from preventing growth and infection and then turning into disease within the body. So what was a pathogen? A pathogen was a general word for a germ, and there were 5 types. An organism that can cause infection or worse, disease. First was bacteria, second was virus, third one was a parasite, fourth one was a fungus, and the fifth one was something called a prion. So just to recap, bacteria are small organisms that can reproduce by themselves. You can see them in a regular high school microscope, and they can be killed with medicines that are called antibiotics. Viruses are tricky little suckers because they are teeny weeny. The only way you can see them is by looking at an electron microscope. They're basically just genetic material, RNA, that's surrounded in a protective protein, yet they cause so much havoc and disease today, including COVID-19. Parasites were single-celled organisms that can invade the body and set up shop, usually in your intestines. They also can include worms, tapeworms, parasitic worms, roundworms, etc. A fungus, probably one of the most common funguses at NU is ringworm, which is why we have to clean the wrestling facility all the time. Ringworm is a fungus that can produce a disease. And then finally, last but not least, the strange one of all the pathogens was a prion. This is a protein that has gone bad in the body. In cattle, it can produce a disease called mad cow disease. In humans, prions are known for creating a disease that is called Khrushchev-Jacobs disease. So it can produce diseases. Infection is when any of these 5 pathogens invade the body. And then disease is where the infection has become so badly damaged the cellular tissue in the body that the cellular tissue can no longer work properly. To build up a resistance is also to build up an immunity, a way for your body to fight off infectious diseases through your defenses. And when I last left you guys, we were talking about the body's first line of defense, which is said to be a non-specific line of defense as it works to stop any and every pathogen from coming into your body. And there were 5 types of, or 5 things involved in the body's first line of defense. Barriers, if you will. The first was skin. Skin releases sweat and oils, which are toxic to certain types of bacteria, as we mentioned before. And then you had a protein that was found in tears. This protein was called lysozymes. It's also found in saliva, and it is toxic to some types of pathogens. The third one was cilia, which are tiny little hairs that are found in your trachea and your respiratory tract, as well as your nose. Most of these are covered with mucus, which is a sticky film, and the whole idea is to trap a pathogen before it gets deep into the respiratory system or the lung tissue. And these cilia are constantly catching pathogens and dust particles, sweeping them up to the back of your throat where you tend to swallow without consciously thinking about it. And once you swallow those, they tend to go down to the stomach, which was the fourth one. We have gastric juices in our stomach, which tend to have a very low pH and can kill some of these pathogens, not all. And then last but not least, we actually have the good bacteria, which was called symbiotic bacteria. Our bodies are covered with these good bacteria. It's kind of a win-win relationship. We give them a nice house to live in, and in return, they fight off other types of bad bacteria. Symbiotic bacteria, as I mentioned, commonly found in the respiratory and digestive systems, the urethra and the vagina, and they inhibit the growth of other pathogens. Now, if you are infected by one of these pathogens and it is able to get through these first 5 things found in the first line of defense, that's when our body's second line of defense starts to take over. The body's second line of defense is also non-specific. In other words, this line of defense is also working to stop any and every pathogen from invading your body, which could possibly turn into disease. And as the picture shows, the main organism that's found in the second line of defense is the white blood cell, and there are a number of types of white blood cells. The first main type of white blood cell is called a phagocyte. This is a white blood cell that can kill pathogens by phagocytosis, which is to say going Pac-Man on a pathogen. It can swallow them up and digest them. Okay. Phagocytes, also known as leukocytes, phagocytes, all belong to the realm of white blood cells, which I have abbreviated there. And these types of white blood cells engulf or swallow their invaders, again, by the process of phagocytosis. There are 3 main types of phagocytes. The first type is called the neutrophil. And the neutrophil is probably the most common white blood cell found throughout the entire body, as I have down here. It's the most common type. I believe the next slide is going to say about 50 to 70% of all white blood cells found in your body are in fact these neutrophils. Neutrophils are found in the bloodstream, in the arteries and the veins and the capillaries. That's kind of their beat. They're like cops that patrol the bloodstream looking for bad guy pathogens so that they can swallow them by phagocytosis. So white blood cells are kind of like cops, and they patrol different areas. Neutrophils tend to patrol the bloodstream. And as I mentioned before, they engulf or swallow pathogens by phagocytosis. Now, the second type of phagocytes are called monocytes. Monocytes start off small, but then they grow up to be very, very large. They grow up to become what we call macrophage, and macro is the opposite of micro, which means very, very large. Okay, so monocytes are white blood cells, phagocytes, that grow up and differentiate and become these macrophages. Now, one thing they like to do is eat old cells, old human cells that aren't working properly, but they also can eat up, by phagocytosis, pathogens. There it is, they engulf pathogens. Now, monocytes start off in the bloodstream, which is kind of shown by the red background, but then monocytes, after a few days in the bloodstream, have the ability to migrate out of the bloodstream and go into the tissues, kind of like the lymphatic system, the lymph tissue that oftentimes swells up around your neck when you guys get sick. Usually when they swell up, it's because a lot of these macrophages have gone to that area and are fighting off pathogens. So monocytes are the second. Now, the third type of phagocyte is called the natural killer. And natural killers are kind of white blood cells that do damage control, so to speak. These are larger white blood cells that look for human cells, your cells, that have been so badly infected by pathogens that chances are they won't work properly anymore. So these natural killers go and take out your human cells that have been so badly damaged they're never going to work quite as well again. Some studies are showing they're somewhat effective in killing cells that have been attacked by viruses, but it's hard to get an upper hand on the virus as it reproduces throughout your cells. That's kind of the tricky part, is the rate of virus reproduction and depending on what the virus actually is. So natural killers look for your human cells to destroy those human cells who have been so badly infected they're probably not going to work so well again. Now, cells that have been infected in the human body can't talk to one another. They can't cry out for help, but what they can do is secrete chemicals. Chemicals are a means of communication from one human cell to another one that can attract other things or can be cries for help. One cry for help that a human cell can release is called complement proteins. Complement proteins, when they're secreted and released by a human cell, number one, attract phagocytes, which, as you recall, are white blood cells. So if your human cell is in danger of being invaded by a pathogen, say a virus, it can shoot out all these protein molecules that were made in the ribosomes out into the bloodstream or into the tissue, and these complement proteins are going to be picked up by white blood cell phagocytes, which are going to come to that area and are going to be looking for those bad guy pathogens. It's kind of a distress signal or a cry for help. Now, another thing these proteins can do is cause what we call pathogen lysis. Lysis is a word that means death by stabbing. So if you could imagine your human cell secretes all of these complement proteins, hundreds of them in all directions because it's about to be invaded. Some of these proteins can actually go straight through a pathogen and cause death by lysis, which is death by stabbing. So it's kind of a win-win situation. It can stab and kill some of these pathogens, and at the same time, it can cause white blood cell phagocytes to come so that they can swallow them up by phagocytosis. So complement proteins are just one chemical that cells can use to ask for help or cry out for help. Another chemical that cells can secrete, your human cells, if they're in trouble and they need help, is a chemical that is called interferon. Interferon is also a protein that was made in the ribosomes, secreted by cells that have been infected by viruses, which activate or call other healthy cells to be on the lookout. So if one of your human cells was invaded by a virus, it could secrete interferon, which could cause other human cells to come over to the scene, and then those other human cells could secrete complement proteins that could call in the white blood cell phagocytes for help, as well as cause lysis or death by stabbing. In hospitals these days, doctors have created a synthetic version of interferon, and a lot of infectious disease doctors will use this interferon chemical and they'll put it in IV drip bags to actually help people that are suffering from various diseases to attract or stimulate their second line of defense and create more of a response by these white blood cells. Last but not least, for your body's second line of defense is this chain reaction of sorts that is known as the inflammatory response. The inflammatory response is your body's response to tissue damage, cuts, foreign materials, etc. And when injury occurs, the damaged cells, again, they can't talk to one another, but what they can do is secrete or release chemical messengers, which are a cry for help. So again, this whole response is your body's response to tissue damage, a cut, stepping on a thumbtack, getting a splinter of sorts, etc. And it is a chain reaction. So if you would, please pause this YouTube video for a moment, and would you please draw this? And I kind of have it big and bold on this slide because this is kind of an example. What you guys are drawing, please draw all this. Draw the red, which shows blood vessels and blood flowing through it. The brown part with the hair, that could be the top part of your toe or your finger, etc. And the black basically implies heat, which we'll talk more about. But if you could take a moment, pause this video and draw this. And if I were you, I would take about half a page of notes to draw this effectively so that we can go through this. Last but not least, would you please draw a tack or a nail going straight through the skin, all the way through the tissue, and poking deep into this blood vessel right here. So let's say that you're out walking around in bare feet and you accidentally step on a tack or a nail, or maybe this thing instead is a splinter that's gone all the way through the skin into the bloodstream. That's kind of what we need. Okay? When something like this takes place, your body's inflammatory response kicks into gear. Here we go. Okay? Instantaneously, the damaged cells that are above that blood vessel that you just drew are going to secrete these chemicals called histamines. Histamines are chemicals released by damaged cells. Basically, it's when your cell screams for help. Your cell believes it has been attacked and it's calling other people into the area. These chemicals are histamines. Histamines set off a whole chain reaction in your body. Histamines cause the following to take place. First and foremost, it will cause your blood vessels to undergo vasodilation. Vasodilation is when your blood vessels that normally are very small and only allow a little bit of blood flow dilate and get really, really big. When this happens, it causes a heck of a lot more blood to flow into the damaged area. And when that blood comes in, it also brings in a lot of heat because blood carries heat. Okay? These leaky blood vessels will now start flowing into the damaged area and will call in phagocyte white blood cells into the damaged area, which immediately are looking for pathogens involved in the damaged area. Now, fluid flows into the tissue. What this means is all of these cells have been damaged or ruptured by the thing that impaled your toe, and you've got cytoplasm that is flowing in the damaged area all over. So you've got blood from the blood vessel coming into the damaged area. You've got cytoplasm leaking everywhere. And remember, these damaged cells have secreted histamines, which are going to start causing other things to occur as well. Okay? As I mentioned before, vasodilation is going to cause more blood to flow into the damaged area, which is going to bring more heat or warmth, which is going to make the injured area feel very, very hot. It's almost going to feel very, very hot, and sometimes it's almost feeling like your toe or your finger, whatever was damaged, actually has a pulse because you've got so much flow of blood and cytoplasm that is going over the nerve endings. It will create what is referred to as letter E, edema. Edema is known as swelling. You can tell in this picture, this lady's left hand is a lot more swollen than the picture on the right. That hand is not as swollen, and that is because there's been a lot of cytoplasm and or blood that is leaked out into the damaged area. So edema is a word in Latin that means swelling. Now, after the edema is occurring, you're going to start to feel a lot of pain. And the reason why it's going to be painful to the touch is because there's so much fluid pressure. Fluid from the blood flow, from the damaged capillary or vein, also the cytoplasm that is putting pressure on the nerve ending, which is going to create that sensation of pain. Now, it's also going to itch. One of the key side effects of histamine chemicals that are found in the body is itching, and we'll talk more about that in a sec. Okay? And before I get to letter H, fever, I'm going to back up. Okay? The best thing to do if you ever have an injury like this, where the inflammatory response has been kicked in, is to ice that area. Icing is not going to cause vasodilation. Instead, icing causes vasoconstriction, causes the blood vessels to get really, really small. When the blood vessels get small, less blood flow can flow into the blood vessels, which means less heat is going to come to the damaged area. Vasoconstriction by ice is going to cause the edema or the swelling to go down. The pain is also going to feel a lot better because the fluid pressure will decrease. The histamines oftentimes are left over in a damaged area for several days to sometimes weeks, and something that's really good to relieve the itching is to take an antihistamine, something like Benadryl, if you've ever heard of Benadryl before. Last but not least, in some cases where the inflammatory response occurs, A low-grade fever is a common side effect. And when I say low-grade, I'm talking about 99 to about 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. Now, the reason why I have a 2 there next to fever, and I want you guys to add this into your notes, is that there are 2 reasons why having a low-grade fever in this case are very good. First and foremost, a low-grade fever is a response by the body which activates phagocytes or white blood cells. It causes white blood cells to be on the lookout for pathogens that might be in the body so that those phagocytes can come eat them up by phagocytosis. The second reason why a low-grade fever is so key here is because pathogens can't reproduce quite as fast as they could when the temperature was lower. So by increasing your body's core temperature, it slows down pathogen reproduction, which allows white blood cell phagocytes to get the upper hand. So low-grade fevers are kind of good in a sense. It's your body's way of reacting. If one of those 5 types of pathogens makes it through the body's first and second line of defense, then, last but not least, we would go to what is referred to as the immune response, which is your body's third line of defense. Your body's third line of defense is a very, very specific response to the specific pathogen that has invaded it. And as you can tell by this graphic, it is all-out war between your body's white blood cells, very specifically, and the pathogen that has infected or invaded the body. But that is another week. So if you could, please copy down these notes. Not a whole lot of stuff, kind of intriguing. If you have any questions whatsoever, because this is kind of good stuff, and especially what we're dealing with right now with COVID, please drop me an email at mweaver, W-E-A-V-E-R, @NJUHSD.com. Drop me an email, questions, comments, concerns. I'm always open to what you got. And that worksheet, first and second line of defense, I'm signing today, Wednesday, April 15th, 2020, and it will be due at the end of the day next Wednesday, which I believe is April 22nd. Until then, you guys, you stay classy and take care of yourself. Bye-bye.